It seems an appropriate time to reflect on some of these accomplishments with a view to how we can secure a place in our lives and in our communities for this legacy that we have inherited. We have asked Michael Kluckner to host this look at Langley's heritage. As well as being an artist and writer, Michael Kluckner is probably the best known and highly respected voice that we have for the protection and enjoyment of our heritage.
The richness and diversity of British Columbia's heritage can be traced back to its birthplace in the Lower Fraser Valley. Throughout Langley, there are monuments that stand as a testament to over a century of settlement. Over the decades, these monuments have fallen into disrepair, and their history and importance have been forgotten. The settlers' faces and names are unknown. Fortunately, this is not all that is left of Langley's past. Hello, I'm Michael Kluckner. An awareness and appreciation of Langley's heritage enriches the lives of everyone in the community, but it is only through the act of preserving this heritage that we have anything left to appreciate. Since 1979, the Langley Heritage Society, which is a non-profit organization, has been working to preserve the legacy of Langley's pioneers and the character of its communities for the benefit of present and future generations. In a throwaway society, economics often works against the preservation of the past when a structure becomes outdated. That is exactly what happened to this CN station at the corner of Mavis and Glover in Fort Langley. It is now the last of 6 passenger depots in its class in British Columbia. The station was built in 1915, 4 years after the railway line was put through Fort Langley. Today, we often forget the importance of the railway in the lives of people who lived in Langley. It provided employment and transportation to destinations like the market in New Westminster. A trip that had previously taken 8 hours to complete could now be done in just over an hour. From 1917 to 1929, Mr. and Mrs. Simpson worked and lived in the station, where Mrs. Simpson kept a well-known perennial garden, winning many of CN's annual competitions. By the early 1900s, station gardening was an incorporated part of railway policy. The practice not only beautified the station and displayed the richness of the soil, encouraging new settlement, but it also demonstrated that station employees were decent and industrious citizens. This station served the community for 66 years until 1981, when funding was cut and passenger service along the line ended. Following this, communities throughout British Columbia witnessed the wholesale destruction of their passenger depots. Buildings that were an intimate part of the community's identity simply ceased to exist. The Langley Heritage Society first became involved with this station in 1982, when CN announced its decision to double-track the main line through Fort Langley and to demolish this building. The Society was instrumental in resolving the conflicts between CN and the municipality and was solely responsible for the station's restoration. They persuaded CN to allow the disused station to remain beside the main line, a first in CN history, although in 1983 it was moved 1,000 feet to the east from its original location to this site, on land leased by the Township of Langley from CN. The building itself is owned by the Township of Langley and leased to the Langley Heritage Society. In 1984, the building became designated as a municipal heritage site. Today, the building houses a small museum, a non-profit society's office, and a public meeting space. The station has been restored to its original state and is furnished with period pieces from the 1920s. Even Mrs. Simpson's garden was replanted with the types of flowers that she originally used here. Now, a building like the Fort Langley train station is a very laborious restoration job. New foundation had to be poured. Old work that had deteriorated had to be cut away. Material such as this shiplap, which is no longer made, had to be milled in order to match the surviving original work. Paint had to be scraped, and then research done on the paint colors, and then the whole building repainted and reshingled. And that's only the exterior. The interior then had to be restored, and the correct combination of wallpaper and paint and artifacts had to be created and come together with a lot of original research in order to put the station back to just where it was when it opened. So why does the Langley Heritage Society go to so much trouble to restore a building back to exactly where it was when it was created? Because this is a concrete link with our ancestors, with the origin of our communities. Structures such as this one are a direct link with our past and show the way our communities have evolved over time. The Heritage Society's first restoration project was brought to their attention in the fall of 1979 by descendants of one of Langley's earliest settlers, who were concerned about the condition of their ancestral home. The Michaud House on 204th Street along the Nickameckle River is perhaps the oldest building in Langley City. Built in 1888 by rancher Joseph Michaud, this house is representative of the more modest two-story farmhouses built in the valley before the turn of the century. The Michaud family was one of the earliest Roman Catholic families in the area, and it is said that Langley's first Roman Catholic Mass was held in the parlor of the family house. This is a replica of the Michaud parlor on permanent display at the Langley Centennial Museum. The family cleared much of the land where the city of Langley is today. The house was sold out of the family in 1919, after which it had a number of owners. The restoration of the Michaud House was a joint project between the Langley Arts Council and the Langley Heritage Society. But the Michaud family also played a major role through their encouragement and information, as well as providing some of the funding needed to complete the project. Today the building is owned by the city and is home to the Langley Arts Council. The Langley Heritage Society also has an office in the building where research is carried out on each project, and the documented information is stored for future reference. The most rewarding aspect of the work done by the Society is informing Langley communities of their local history and increasing their knowledge and awareness of local heritage structures and sites. Over the years, this has been done in a number of ways. In 1982, the Society embarked on a 4-year project to catalog Langley's historic buildings. The result of this work was the Inventory of Historic Buildings in Langley, a document which contains detailed historical and architectural information on 71 buildings. The buildings are divided into 3 evaluation classes, which reflect their heritage potential on the basis of historical association, integrity, architectural style, usability, and environment or context. The catalog provides a guide for the Society and local authorities when decisions regarding funding and preservation are made. The Heritage Society has also put together a driving tour of Langley's heritage sites and a walking tour of Fort Langley, both of which appear in the Langley Visitor's Guide. The Heritage Society supports special public events like the Heritage Designation Ceremony for the Carr Mercer Barn and the Houston House, which took place in July of 1991. Here Society members were on hand in period costume to answer questions about the history and significance of the buildings and the people who built them. Education is still a priority at Lochiel School, where heritage preservation brings the past to life for present-day students to experience and understand. Run by the Langley Centennial Museum, Lochiel School is in session throughout the school year, providing Langley students with the opportunity to step into the past and experience the environment of an era they will never know, in a manner no book could achieve. Lochiel School was built in 1924 to replace an older building dating from 1894. Students from grade 1 to grade 8 received their education in the simple one-room schoolhouse. The new schoolhouse was only in use for 1 year before the students were transported to a larger school in Murrayville. It reopened in 1937 and remained in use until 1975, when arsonists set fire to some of the surrounding school buildings. After over a decade of neglect, the schoolhouse was brought to the attention of the Langley Heritage Society by one of its former teachers, who was concerned about the loss of the building. In 1988, Lochiel School was moved from its original location in front of the Big R Farmstead on 16th Avenue to the Anand Rolett Farmstead in Campbell Valley Park on 204th Street. It was very important to relocate the schoolhouse to property on another farmstead, for this setting illustrates early community development in which farmers donated land for schools that were built and run by the community. Here the Heritage Society worked to restore the dilapidated structure and refurnish it with authentic 1920s schoolroom equipment, including tiny grade 1 desks. The restoration of the Anand Rolett House, located a few hundred yards behind Lochiel School, was a joint project between the Greater Vancouver Regional District and the Langley Heritage Society. The house was built in 1886 by Alexander Anand, who sold it to William Taylor in 1905. By 1914, it was being rented by Len Rolett, who took title to it in 1931. Some heritage buildings, like the Anand Rolett House, have two-part names, the first one being for the original builder and the second for the long-term resident. Len Rolett was a colorful character and was known throughout Langley as a water diviner, or locator as he preferred to be called. He claimed to have located over 1,000 wells, including the one at Langley Memorial Hospital. Mr. Rolett was also well known for his participation in many area parades in which he drove his pre-1900 fringe-top Surrey. He lived in the house until his death in 1973. Mr. Rolett left his artifacts to the Langley Centennial Museum and the house and outbuildings to the Greater Vancouver Regional District, which had already purchased the rest of the 80-acre farm. The Langley Heritage Society was approached and took on the project of restoring the aging Anand Rolett House. The farmstead was given heritage status in 1981 and is now an integral part of the park's facilities. So far, we've only examined individual projects that the Langley Heritage Society has been involved in. Increasingly, however, they are becoming concerned with keeping intact the inherited character of Langley's communities. For a century, Langley residents have referred to Murrayville as Five Corners because it grew up around the junction of three important roads. In the center of this small community stands the Murrayville Pump House. For 54 years, this pump house supplied water to the Belmont Murrayville School, the municipal hall and neighboring homes. In 1912, 1 year after the school was built, additions were added which rendered the school's water supply inadequate. To resolve this, the school board signed a 99-year lease with Mr. Rod Cummings to supply the school with water from the artesian well behind his butcher shop. Mr. Cummings was the only butcher in Langley for many years, and the porch of his shop was the gathering place for local farmers during the summer months. Eventually, an electric pump was built to increase the supply of water received by the school, and in 1928 the pump house was erected to shelter it. The cement trough outside the pump house was built earlier and caught the overflow from the well, providing local residents with a watering spot for their livestock. The pump was turned off in 1982 when the school and surrounding buildings joined the municipal water system. The pump house was then used as a municipal storage shed for a few years before being abandoned. In the spring of 1991, the Langley Heritage Society reshingled the roof and began the process of removing the old paint. Although it is a small and basic structure, the Murrayville Pump House is a focus for the community's identity and an important link with its agricultural past. The transformation of this heritage community over the next few years will be guided in part by the Langley Heritage Society, which has been working with the municipality to preserve 4 central heritage buildings. Sharon United Church, which stands right behind the pump house, was built by members of the community in 1890. Across 216th stands the Third Porter's store, which was built in 1940. The first store on that site was built in 1914 and was purchased by Mr. P.Y. Porter in 1917. It has been in the Porter family ever since. The Travelers Hotel on the other side of 48th Avenue was the first building erected in Murrayville. It was built in 1887 by Billy Murray. During future development, these historic buildings will be the key to maintaining Murrayville's community identity. Heritage buildings can also be an asset to development. The Wark Dumay House on Kwantlen College's Langley campus illustrates how development and heritage preservation can complement each other. The house was built around the turn of the century by Robert Wark, with lumber milled by the family at the site. An early warden of Langley, Robert Wark inherited the property from his uncle Henry, who was a Hudson's Bay Company manager at Fort Langley. The Wark family lived in the house until 1923. It was rented out for 3 years and then purchased by Albert Dumay, whose family lived there until 1979 when the property was acquired by Kwantlen College. When the college closed, the house was rented out. Plans were later made for a full campus and the Wark Dumay house was to be demolished. The Heritage Society approached a very apprehensive and skeptical Kwantlen College about reconsidering the destruction of this heritage building. After 2.5 years of negotiation, the Society received a 3-year lease on the house and began the process of restoration. Today, the building survives as an excellent example of Carpenter Gothic architecture from a prosperous era in Langley's past, and is an asset to the college, whose plans for the new Langley campus are designed around the restored Wark Dumay House. In addition to their active role in the restoration and preservation of buildings like the Wark Dumay House, the Langley Heritage Society also functions in a supervisory and consultative capacity with other groups involved in restorations. The Houston House behind me is a unique example of such a cooperative venture. Situated along Allard Crescent, on land that was occupied between 1827 and 1838 by the original Fort Langley, the Houston House was built in 1909 by Alexander Houston. Alexander Houston lived in the house with his wife until his death in 1950. His wife continued living there until her death in the early 1970s. The Greater Vancouver Regional District acquired the land for inclusion within Darby Reach Regional Park, and the Houston House lay empty. After working in conjunction with the Langley Heritage Society for the preservation of the house, the Greater Vancouver Regional District signed a contract with private citizens for them to restore the Houston House in exchange for a lease on the house and property. The Heritage Society was consulted throughout the restoration process. The experience the Society's members have gained through their work on these projects make them a valuable resource for anyone involved in heritage restoration. Next to the Houston House stands the Carr Mercer Barn. The barn was built in 1876 and is a unique example of mortise and tenon construction, built entirely from hand-hewn boards. In 1989, the barn was dismantled and the pieces were moved from Chilliwack to its present location by the Chilliwack Heritage Society, where it was painstakingly reassembled. The Langley Heritage Society supervised the restoration of the Carr Mercer barn and found the funding needed to re-roof the enormous structure. The Carr Mercer barn stands as a concrete testimony to the efforts and ingenuity of past generations, but Langley's rural heritage is not limited to barns and homes. It also includes the natural environment. These California redwoods along 96th Avenue were planted around the turn of the century by the Hopes, one of Fort Langley's founding families, and were designated in September of 1980. The Hopes also planted this maple tree on the corner of 96th Avenue and Glover in remembrance of those who died in World War I. The Langley Heritage Society works to ensure that these and other significant trees in Langley that have been threatened are preserved so that future generations will be able to admire them and remember. Through their perseverance and dedication, the members of the Langley Heritage Society have provided us with a number of meaningful links to our past that point out the range and diversity of heritage in Langley and keep alive the achievements of the pioneers who built this community. The Society believes that the preservation of heritage in Langley is beneficial to all the residents of Langley, and that it is in the combination of the new Langley and the old Langley that Langley will be its most successful into the future. Heritage preservation is rather like environmental conservation, the preservation of trees and the sensible use of resources. Heritage preservation is about the past, such as this cemetery here, and it's about the present, the reuse of buildings. It's in this combination that Langley has a good footing to embark on its journey into the future.